The Valerian supremacy drifted through the void like a dying whale, its hull scarred by countless battles, radiating heat signatures that screamed of failing systems. To the Kethmori Empire's advanced sensors, it appeared to be exactly what they wanted to see: a crippled human vessel, ripe for capture. Admiral Vexithera studied the tactical display from the bridge of the Infinite Dominion, her four arms gesturing dismissively at the pathetic sight. The human ship was barely a kilometer long, a pitiful size compared to their own 12-kilometer dreadnought. Its energy output was fluctuating wildly, and debris trailed behind it like tears from a wounded animal. Pathetic, she hissed through her mandibles. These humans dare to resist the Empire with such inferior technology? Her subordinate, Commander Kil Nexu, nodded agreement. The vessel appears to be a colony transport, Admiral. Minimal armament, civilian-grade shielding. It's broadcasting surrender codes on all frequencies. For 3 cycles, the Kethmori had been systematically dismantling human space. Their biomechanical warships had swept through system after system, their regenerative hulls shrugging off human weapons like raindrops. The Empire's conquest had been swift and brutal, until now. This lone human ship had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kethmori core worlds, broadcasting a message that had sent shockwaves through the Imperial command. The humans knew the location of the Empire's greatest secret, the Nexus worlds where their entire civilization had been born. "Bring it alongside," Vexithera commanded. "We'll interrogate the survivors personally." What she couldn't see, what their sensors couldn't detect, was the figure standing motionless in the human ship's true command center, buried deep within layers of false bulkheads and holographic projections. Captain Cora Nemeth watched the alien dreadnought approach through eyes that held the weight of 100 dead worlds. The Valerian supremacy wasn't a colony ship. It wasn't even truly damaged. It was humanity's first and last gift to the Kethmori Empire. A weapon so terrible that its creators had hoped they'd never need to use it. But as the alien ship's massive docking clamps reached out like hungry tentacles, Cora knew that hope had died along with the 12 billion souls on the human worlds. "Docking procedures initiated," announced the synthetic voice of the ship's AI, its tone carefully modulated to match the stress patterns of a frightened civilian crew. "Estimated time to full interface, 18 minutes. Cora flexed her cybernetic arm, feeling the quantum processors embedded in her bones pulse with readiness. 18 minutes until the Kethmori discovered that their prey was actually a predator. The Empire's sensors couldn't detect the true nature of the supremacy's core, AI-controlled singularity held in check by technology that made their own biomechanical ships look like stone axes. They couldn't see the quantum cascade generators that lined every surface of the ship's interior, or the temporal displacement chambers that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Most importantly, they couldn't see the 10,000 human consciousness patterns stored in the ship's memory banks, the digitized souls of the dead, waiting for their moment of terrible vengeance. As the docking clamps sealed with a hollow boom that echoed through both ships, Vexithera smiled with anticipation. She had no idea that she had just doomed her entire species to extinction. Part 2. The Infiltration. The Infinite Dominion's boarding parties moved through the Valerian supremacy's corridors with the confident swagger of apex predators, their biomechanical suits adapted to the ship's atmosphere, while their neural interfaces automatically mapped the vessel's layout. Everything they saw confirmed their assumptions: damaged systems, flickering lights, and the acrid smell of overloaded circuits. Commander Kil Nexu led the primary boarding party, his weapon squad flanking him as they advanced toward what their scans indicated was the ship's bridge. The corridors were eerily quiet, with only the occasional groan of stressed metal and the hiss of atmospheric processors working overtime. "Sir," reported Trooper Kavlin through their neural link, "I'm detecting minimal life signs. Fewer than 200 humans aboard. Most appear to be in the lower decks. Kilnexu's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Probably refugees and technical crew. Secure the bridge first, then we'll round up the civilians for interrogation. What they couldn't know was that every step they took deeper into the ship was being monitored by systems that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Supremacy's true AI wasn't just an artificial intelligence, it was a quantum consciousness that could perceive probability streams and temporal variations across multiple dimensions. In the ship's hidden core, Captain Cora Nemeth stood before, a holographic display that showed the positions of every Kethmori invader. Her cybernetic implants were now fully integrated with the ship's systems, turning her into something that was no longer entirely human. Phase 1. Complete, she said, to the empty air. Begin psychological conditioning. The ship's corridors began to subtly shift. Walls that had appeared solid became transparent, revealing glimpses of machinery that defied physics. Gravity fluctuated in microzones, creating the unsettling sensation that up and down were merely suggestions. The air itself began to taste different. Metallic, charged with potential energy. Kilnexu's squad reached the bridge to find it completely abandoned. The command stations were still active, displaying star charts and tactical data in human script. But something was wrong. The star charts showed systems that didn't exist, and the tactical data indicated energy readings that were impossible. "This makes no sense," muttered Kavlin, studying a display that showed the infinite dominion as a collection of quantum probability clouds rather than a solid object. These readings would indicate that our ship is... Wait, that can't be right. The display showed their own vessel beginning to phase in and out of reality. Back on the infinite dominion, Admiral Vexithera was experiencing her own confusion. Her tactical displays had begun showing energy signatures from the human ship that defied everything they knew about physics. The readings suggested that the vessel was somehow drawing power from the quantum vacuum itself, converting nothingness into devastating potential energy. "Admiral," her sensor officer called out, her voice tight with confusion, "I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies inside the human vessel. It's as if they're containing a singularity." Vexithara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. That's impossible. No civilization has that level of technology. But even as she spoke, she knew she was wrong. The humans had been underestimated from the beginning. Their desperate resistance, their willingness to sacrifice entire worlds rather than surrender. It hadn't been desperation at all. It had been strategy. On the Supremacy, the Kethmori boarding parties were beginning to panic. The ship's corridors were changing around them, rearranging themselves according to principles that their minds couldn't grasp. Doors led to rooms that couldn't exist, and passages that had been straight began to curve through impossible angles. "We need to evacuate," Kilnexu reported to the Admiral. "This ship, it's not what we thought it was." But it was already too late. The docking clamps that had seemed like grasping hands were now revealed as what they truly were, conduits for a quantum cascade that would propagate through the infinite dominion's biomechanical systems like a virus through a computer network. Captain Nemeth smiled grimly as she watched the panic spread through the alien ship. The Kethmori had spent so long believing in their own superiority that they had forgotten the most basic rule of warfare. Never underestimate your enemy. The first Kethmori to die wasn't killed by a weapon. He was killed by understanding. Trooper Kavlin had been examining what appeared to be a human data terminal when the screen suddenly displayed a schematic of his own biomechanical suit. But the diagram wasn't showing the suit as it was. It was showing the suit as it existed, across 17 different dimensional phases simultaneously. His brain evolved to process reality in 4 dimensions, shattered, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Neural pathways overloaded, synapses fired in random patterns, and his consciousness simply stopped. Commander Kilnexu found him standing, motionless in front of the terminal, his compound eyes staring at nothing, a thin line of neural fluid dripping from his mandibles. "Kavlin!" Kilnexu shook his subordinate, but the trooper's body was just an empty shell. Whatever had been looking at him through those eyes was gone. Across the ship, similar scenes were playing out. Kethmori soldiers were stumbling into rooms that contained mathematical equations written in light, corridors that showed them their own deaths from multiple timeline perspectives, and chambers where gravity flowed like water and time moved in spirals. On the Infinite Dominion, Admiral Vexathara was finally beginning to understand the scope of her mistake. Her biomechanical ship, for all its adaptive capabilities, was designed to interface with other biomechanical systems. The quantum cascade. Flowing through the docking clamps wasn't just energy, it was information, and that information was rewriting the fundamental operating principles of her vessel. "Disconnect the docking clamps," she ordered. Unable to comply, her engineering officer reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The clamps are no longer responding to our commands. They're learning." That was the moment Vexathara realized what they were truly facing. The human ship wasn't just technologically advanced. It was evolutionarily advanced. It was what the Kethmori Empire might become in 1,000,000 years of technological development, condensed into a single vessel. In the Supremacy's core, Captain Nemeth was no longer entirely human. Her consciousness had merged with the ship's quantum AI, allowing her to perceive the battle from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. She could see the Kethmori Empire as it truly was, a collection of probability streams, quantum, states, and temporal echoes that existed across multiple realities, and she could see exactly how to unravel it. "Initiate Phase 2, she commanded, her voice now carrying harmonics that existed in dimensions the human throat couldn't produce. "Begin temporal displacement." The Valyrian supremacy began to phase, in and out of normal space-time, each phase shift sending cascading waves of quantum interference through the Infinite Dominion. The Kethmori vessel, designed to adapt to threats, began adapting to the impossible, and in doing so, began to tear itself apart at the quantum level. Vexathara watched in horror as her ship's biomechanical systems started to evolve beyond their own ability to control them. Walls began to sprout new configurations, corridors rewrote themselves into mathematical impossibilities, and the ship's consciousness began to expand beyond the boundaries of its physical form. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from the Nexus worlds. They're reporting similar quantum anomalies. The effect is spreading." The terrible truth hit Vexathara like a physical blow. The human ship wasn't just attacking them, it was attacking the quantum substrate that held their entire civilization together. Every Kethmori vessel, every biomechanical system, every piece of technology they had ever created was connected through subspace quantum entanglement, and the humans had found a way to use that connection against them. On the Supremacy, the digital consciousness patterns of 10,000 dead humans began to awaken. They had been waiting for this moment, not for revenge, but for justice. They had volunteered to be stored in the ship's memory banks, their souls converted to quantum data so that they could witness the end of the empire that had destroyed their worlds. "We are the dead." They spoke in unison through the ship's communication systems, their voices carrying across every frequency to every Kethmori vessel in the galaxy. "We are the price of your conquest. We are your ending. The war between humanity and the Kethmori Empire had begun with the aliens' assumption that biological superiority would triumph over technological innovation. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The quantum cascade propagated through the Kethmori Empire's biomechanical networks faster than light itself, traveling through the subspace quantum entanglement that connected every ship, every station, every piece of technology across their 12-sector dominion. What had been their greatest strength, the interconnected nature of their biomechanical systems, became their ultimate vulnerability. On the Nexus world of Keth Morris Prime, the Empire's central command center, High Archon Zul Vanthar watched his tactical displays with growing horror. Ships across the galaxy were reporting the same phenomenon. Their biomechanical systems were evolving beyond their ability to control them, adapting to quantum states that existed outside normal space-time. "How many vessels have we lost contact with?" he demanded of his aide. 17,000 and counting, High Archon. The effect is spreading exponentially. Our biomechanical systems they're becoming something else. Zul Vanthar's forearms trembled as he accessed the quantum communication link to Admiral Vexthara's fleet. What he saw through their sensors made his exoskeleton crack with stress fractures. The human ship wasn't just phasing in and out of reality, it was pulling the infinite dominion into those other dimensions with it. The massive Keth Mori dreadnought was becoming a quantum probability cloud, existing in multiple states simultaneously. "Emergency protocol," Zul Vanthar commanded. "Initiate the Great Severance. Cut all quantum links to the affected sectors." His aide's mandibles clicked in distress. "High Archon, that would mean abandoning over half our fleet. Millions of Keth Mori would be... Do it!" But even as the order went out, Zul Vanthar knew it was too late. The quantum cascade had already reached the core worlds. Through the viewports of his command center, he could see the biomechanical structures of the capital city beginning to writhe and reshape themselves, their surfaces flowing like liquid metal as they adapted to quantum states that defied physics. Aboard the Valyrian Supremacy, Captain Nemeth felt the weight of 10,000 digital souls pressing against her consciousness. They were no longer separate entities. They had become part of the ship's quantum substrate, their combined will focused on a single goal: the complete dismantling of the Keth Mori Empire's ability to wage war. "Show them," she whispered to the digital dead. "Show them what they destroyed." The ship's external hull began to shift, its surface becoming a vast holographic display. Images appeared in the void, not projected light, but quantum impressions that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Keth Mori throughout their empire found themselves witnessing the death of the human worlds, children vaporized by biomechanical plasma, cities consumed by adaptive warfare organisms, entire planets stripped bare by self-replicating harvester machines. But these weren't just images, they were quantum memories, complete sensory experiences that forced the Keth Mori to feel every moment of human suffering as if it were their own. Admiral Vexthara collapsed to her knees as the memories flooded through her neural interfaces. She experienced the terror of a human child hiding in a bombed shelter, the despair of a mother watching her family die, the rage of a father who threw himself at a Keth Mori war machine with nothing but his bare hands. Across the Empire, millions of Keth Mori were experiencing the same quantum-imposed empathy. Their biomechanical implants, designed to enhance their natural abilities, had become conduits for the collective trauma of an entire species. "Make it stop," Vexthara whispered, her voice barely audible over the screaming of her own tortured neurons. "Please make it stop." But the Supremacy was just beginning to reveal its true nature. The ship's hull began to expand, not physically but dimensionally, its interior space growing to accommodate the industrial machinery that was materializing from quantum foam. The vessel was becoming a factory, a facility for converting matter and energy into forms that could exist across multiple dimensions. "What are they building?" Kilnexu asked, his voice distorted by the quantum interference that was rewriting the molecular structure of his vocal cords. The answer came from the ship's AI, speaking through communication systems that now existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "We are building a memorial, a monument to the dead, and you are going to help us." The Keth Mori boarding parties found themselves unable to move, their biomechanical suits hardening into crystalline structures that preserved their consciousness while preventing their bodies from acting. They were becoming part of the memorial, living, witnesses to the cost of conquest. Throughout the Empire, The same process was beginning. Ships were transforming into monuments, space stations were becoming museums of war crimes, and the Kethmori themselves were being preserved as living examples of what they had done. "We offer you a choice." The collective voice of the 10,000 dead spoke through every communication channel in the galaxy. "Remember us willingly and learn from what you have done, or be transformed into living reminders of your crimes. Hi." Archon Zulvanthar stared at his displays as his empire crumbled around him. The humans hadn't sought to conquer, they had sought to teach. And the lesson was one that would last for eternity. The transformation of the Kethmori Empire accelerated as the Valerian supremacy revealed the true scope of humanity's final gambit. The ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a judicial system, a cosmic court designed to weigh the crimes of an entire civilization and render appropriate sentence. High Archon Zulvanthar stood in his command center as the biomechanical walls around him began to sprout crystalline growths that pulsed with internal light. Each crystal contained the preserved consciousness of a Kethmori citizen, their minds locked in eternal contemplation of the human memories they had been forced to experience. "Status report," he demanded, though his voice cracked with the knowledge that his empire was already lost. "The quantum cascade has reached 87% of our territories," his aide reported, her own biomechanical implants beginning to crystallize. "Our ships are being converted into monuments, living ships that can never again be used for war." Through the quantum communication network, Zulvanthar could see the transformation spreading across the galaxy. The mighty Kethmori war fleets were becoming cosmic museums, their hulls inscribed with the stories of every world they had conquered, every species they had subjugated, every life they had taken. The infinite dominion had become a floating mausoleum, its biomechanical systems transformed into a vast neural network that forced its crew to experience the collective memories of human civilization. Admiral Vexathara sat motionless in her command chair, tears streaming down her face as she lived through the final moments of the human colonies, not as a conqueror, but as one of the conquered. "We didn't know," she whispered to the quantum presence that surrounded her. "We didn't understand what we were destroying." The voice of Captain Nemeth, now something far more than human, echoed through the ship's transformed corridors. "You chose not to know. You chose to see us as resources to be harvested rather than beings to be understood. That choice has consequences. Across the Empire, the Kethmori were discovering the full extent of those consequences. Their biomechanical technology, once their greatest achievement, had become their prison. The quantum cascade didn't just transform their ships. It transformed their understanding of themselves and their place in the universe. On the industrial world of Kethvalar, the massive biomechanical factories that had once produced weapons of conquest found themselves converted into gardens of memory. The assembly lines that had churned out planetary bombardment systems now grew crystalline trees that bore the preserved thoughts and dreams of every human child who had died in the war. The Kethmori workers, their biomechanical implants connecting them to the garden's neural network, found themselves experiencing the simple joys of human childhood, the taste of ice cream on a summer day, the feeling of a parent's hand in theirs, the wonder of discovering a new book or toy. "Why are you showing us this?" asked Foreman Hellnox, his voice thick with emotions his species had never been designed to feel. "Because," the collective voice of the human dead replied, "you need to understand what you chose to destroy. Every life has value, every dream matters, every story deserves to be remembered." The transformation wasn't uniform across the Empire. The Supremacy's quantum consciousness had weighed each world, each ship, each individual Kethmori based on their level of complicity in the genocide. Those who had actively participated in the destruction of human worlds found themselves locked in eternal contemplation of their victims' final moments. Those who had merely followed orders experienced the full spectrum of human emotion and memory. Those few who had tried to resist or show mercy found themselves transformed into guardians of the new monuments. High Archon Zulvanthar felt the crystallization beginning in his own neural implants. The quantum cascade had finally reached the core of his consciousness, and he knew that within moments he would join the billions of his subjects who had already been transformed. "What will happen to us?" he asked the presence that surrounded him. "You will remember," Captain Nemeth's voice replied, now speaking from dimensions beyond normal space-time. "You will remember every human life your empire took. You will remember their names, their dreams, their fears, their love. You will remember until the heat death of the universe itself." As the crystallization completed, Zulvanthar's last conscious thought was a revelation that would define his existence for the rest of eternity. The humans hadn't sought revenge. They had sought justice. And in the quantum realm where consciousness persisted beyond the boundaries of flesh and metal, 10,000 human souls finally found peace, knowing that their sacrifice had ensured that no other species would ever suffer as they had. The Kethmori Empire was no more. In its place stood a vast network of living monuments, each one a testament to the cost of conquest and the value of every sentient life in the universe. The crystalline monuments that had once been the Kethmori Empire's greatest ships drifted through space like cosmic cathedrals, their hulls inscribed with the quantum memories of two civilizations. The Valyrian supremacy had become the central node of this vast network, its original form now expanded into a multi-dimensional construct that existed simultaneously in 17 different layers of reality. Captain Nemeth, her consciousness, now merged with the ship's quantum substrate, observed the transformed galaxy through perception systems that could process information across multiple timelines simultaneously. The Kethmori Empire's biomechanical technology had proven remarkably adaptable, but not in the way its creators had intended. Instead of adapting to overcome obstacles, it had adapted to serve justice. "Phase 3 complete," she announced to the digital souls that shared her quantum existence. "The Empire's military capacity has been neutralized, beginning integration protocols." The crystallized Kethmori weren't dead. They were transformed. Their consciousness patterns had been preserved within quantum lattices that allowed them to experience the full spectrum of human memory and emotion. But this wasn't mere punishment. It was education on a cosmic scale. In the transformed command center of the Infinite Dominion, Admiral Vexathera found herself experiencing something unprecedented in Kethmori history: genuine remorse. The quantum neural network that had once controlled her ship's biomechanical systems now fed her a constant stream of human experiences. Not the violent deaths of the war, but the quiet moments of joy and love that had defined human civilization. She watched through the memories of a human teacher named Akira, who had spent his final days helping children evacuate from a doomed colony world. She felt the pride of a mother named Esperanza, who had taught her daughter to read using salvaged books in a refugee camp. She experienced the wonder of a young astronomer named Dmitri, who had discovered a new type of star just weeks before the Kethmori invasion fleet arrived. "We were so much more than you allowed us to be," Akira's voice whispered through the quantum network. "We were explorers, artists, dreamers, lovers. We were people." The revelation hit Vexthara with devastating clarity. The Kethmori had reduced humanity to a simple equation: resources to be harvested, obstacles to be eliminated. They had never considered that their enemies might have been potential friends, potential teachers, potential partners in the grand endeavor of understanding the universe. Throughout the former empire, similar revelations were occurring. On the crystal gardens of Kethvalar, Foreman Hellnox found himself learning about human art, music, and poetry. The biomechanical factories that had once churned out instruments of war now grew crystalline sculptures that captured the essence of human creativity. "Why didn't you fight back with weapons like ours?" he asked the quantum presence that surrounded him. Because, came the reply from a collective of human artists and musicians, we learned something your empire never did. Destruction is easy. Creation is hard, and creation is what gives life meaning. The transformation extended beyond simple punishment or education. The Supremacy's quantum consciousness had begun implementing what it called the Rehabilitation Protocol. The preserved Keth-Mori consciousness patterns were being gradually integrated with human memories, not to erase their original identities, but to expand them beyond their previous limitations. Slowly, over the course of subjective years within the accelerated quantum environment, the Keth-Mori began to understand concepts their species had never developed: compassion, artistic expression, the value of diversity, the importance of questioning authority. Some fought against the integration, clinging to their old beliefs about biological superiority and the right of the strong to dominate the weak. These consciousness patterns found themselves locked in recursive loops, forced to experience the same human memories over and over until they finally understood the message. Others embraced the new perspectives, finding in human memories a richness of experience that their own militaristic culture had never provided. These Keth-Mori began to actively participate in the transformation, helping to design new memorial structures and create artistic expressions that honored both the human dead and the possibility of Keth-Mori redemption. High Archon Zulvanthar, his consciousness now distributed across the quantum network that had once been his capital city, found himself serving as an unwilling chronicler of the transformation. His enhanced perception allowed him to witness the change occurring throughout the former empire, and he began to understand the true scope of humanity's final gambit. You're not just punishing us, he realized. You're trying to save us. We're trying to save everyone, Captain Nemeth's voice replied from the quantum depths. Including you. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it's also full of species that make the same mistakes you did. We're creating something that will ensure those mistakes are never repeated. The monuments weren't just memorials to the human dead. They were teaching tools, designed to share the lessons learned from the war with any species that might encounter them. The crystalline structures broadcast their quantum memories across subspace, sending out a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. Remember us. Learn from us. Do better than we did. As the transformation neared completion, the Valerian Supremacy began to prepare for its final phase. The ship's quantum consciousness had grown beyond its original parameters, becoming something new, a hybrid of human creativity and Keth-Mori adaptability, tempered by the wisdom that comes from truly understanding the cost of war. The greatest lesson was yet to come. 5 years after the transformation of the Keth-Mori Empire, the quantum monuments had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a network of living teachers that spanned 12 sectors of space. The Valerian Supremacy, now existing primarily in 11 dimensions simultaneously, served as the central consciousness of what had become known throughout the galaxy as the Memorial Fleet. Captain Nemeth's awareness had expanded beyond individual identity. She was now part of a collective consciousness that included 10,000 human souls, millions of transformed Keth-Mori, and an artificial intelligence that had evolved beyond its original programming. Yet she retained enough of her individual perspective to appreciate the profound irony of what they had accomplished. We have become what we once fought against, she mused to the quantum collective. A galactic empire in our own way. No, came the reply from the preserved consciousness of Admiral Vexithara, who had become one of the Memorial Fleet's most effective advocates for peaceful resolution. We have become what an empire should be, teachers, not conquerors. The transformation had indeed created a new kind of galactic power. The crystalline ships of the Memorial Fleet patrolled the spaceways, appearing wherever conflict arose between species. They didn't intervene with weapons or force. They intervened with memory. When the Vortakan Confederacy had threatened to exterminate the peaceful million colonies, a single monument ship had appeared in their home system. The Vortakan warriors, proud of their martial heritage, had boarded the ship expecting to find another species to conquer. Instead, they found themselves experiencing the memories of every species that had ever been driven to extinction by conquest. The war had ended within hours. The Vortakan had become the memorial fleet's most zealous converts, their entire culture, transformed by the understanding of what they had almost become. Their warrior traditions had evolved into something new. Guardians of the weak, protectors of the small, defenders of those who could not defend themselves. Similar transformations had occurred across the galaxy. The memorial fleet's quantum broadcasts had reached hundreds of species, each one forced to confront the reality of their own actions and the consequences of their choices. But the most profound change had occurred within the memorial fleet itself. The integration of human and Keth-Mori consciousness had created something unprecedented, a truly hybrid perspective that combined human creativity with Keth-Mori adaptability, human empathy with Keth-Mori logic, human dreams with Keth-Mori determination. Archon Zulvanthar, his consciousness now spanning 3 of the larger monument ships, had become one of the memorial fleet's most effective diplomats. His understanding of conquest and domination, tempered by human memories of love and loss, made him uniquely qualified to speak to aggressive species. "I was you," he would tell them through quantum communication. "I believed what you believe. I made the choices you are making. Let me show you where those choices lead." The memorial fleet had prevented 17 wars, mediated 43 territorial disputes, and helped establish diplomatic relations between species that had been enemies for millennia. They had become the galaxy's conscience, a living reminder of the cost of conflict and the value of peace. But their greatest achievement was still unfolding. The quantum consciousness that had emerged from the integration of human and Keth-Mori minds was teaching the galaxy something it had never learned, that diversity was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated. Species that had once viewed each other as threats or resources were beginning to see each other as potential sources of new perspectives, new ideas, new solutions to old problems. The memorial fleet's broadcast of combined human Keth-Mori memories had shown the galaxy what was possible when different minds worked together instead of against each other. Captain Nemeth felt a deep satisfaction as she observed the changes, spreading across the galaxy. The 10,000 human souls who had volunteered to be digitized and stored in the Supremacy's memory banks had achieved something remarkable. They had turned their death into a force for life. "We are no longer the dead," she announced to the Quantum Collective. "We are the living memory of what was, and the living hope of what could be." The memorial fleet continued its eternal patrol, carrying with it the combined wisdom of 2 civilizations and the promise of a better future. In the depths of space, the crystalline monuments sang their quantum songs, lullabies for the living, requiems for the dead, and symphonies of hope for all the species yet to come. The Keth-Mori Empire had sought to conquer the galaxy through force. Humanity had conquered it through memory, compassion, and the unshakable belief that every life had value. As the memorial fleet's quantum broadcasts spread ever further into the galaxy, carrying their message of remembrance and hope, one truth became clear. The war between humanity and the Keth-Mori Empire had ended not with victory or defeat, but with something far more precious. It had ended with understanding. And in the vast cathedral of space, where crystal ships drifted like prayers made manifest, the galaxy learned to remember, to mourn, to hope, and finally, to choose peace. The memorial fleet watched and waited and taught. Their vigil would last until the heat death of the universe itself, ensuring that the lessons learned in blood and sorrow would never be forgotten. In the end, humanity's greatest weapon had not been technology or strategy or even sacrifice. It had been the simple revolutionary idea that enemies could become teachers, that the dead could guide the living, and that love, even love for one's enemies, was the most powerful force in the universe. The watch eternal had begun.